The world was changing. Empires rose and fell, and in Canaan, Israel stood at a crossroads. For generations, judges led Israel, deliverers, not rulers, guiding the people back to God in times of crisis. There was no throne, no crown, only God as their king. But the people grew restless, looking at their neighbors with kings, armies, and power. They felt vulnerable and wanted to be like everyone else. The spiritual leadership of judges like Samuel seemed outdated. Their desire for a human king was more than political. It was a spiritual crisis, a quiet rejection of God's rule. They traded the unseen king for a flawed earthly one, believing a man could give them what God already promised. This moment is heavy with meaning, a story of the human heart's struggle to trust what cannot be seen. God, in his wisdom, would grant their request, but it would come with a price and deep lessons. The era of judges was ending. The age of kings was about to begin. 3 men would shape this transition: Samuel, the last judge, Saul, the first king, and David, the shepherd chosen by God. Their stories, woven together in 1 Samuel, reveal what God seeks in a leader. It's a timeless saga of faith, failure, and the sovereignty of a God who writes straight with crooked lines. The stage was set for Israel's greatest transformation. 1 Samuel is an epic drama of transition told through 3 lives. Samuel, the last judge, is a prophet of integrity, guiding Israel even when he disagrees with their choices. Saul, the people's choice, looks the part. Tall, handsome, promising, but his reign unravels into pride and disobedience. Saul's story warns us God values the heart, not outward appearance. Then comes David, the overlooked shepherd boy. God sees in him what no one else does, a heart full of faith and love. The Lord does not look at what people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. This truth unlocks the whole book, why a shepherd is chosen over a king, and what God values in a leader. Samuel, Saul, and David's lives are woven together by God's hand, showing his sovereignty even when people make poor choices. True leadership honors God through humility and obedience, not status or strength. Through their triumphs and failures, we see God's patient plan pointing to a greater king. 1 Samuel is not just history. It's a mirror for our own search for a righteous leader. Their stories challenge us to examine our own hearts. The journey of these 3 men reveals the kind of kingdom God desires. 1 Samuel unfolds in 3 acts, each centered on a key figure. The first act follows Samuel, whose life begins with his mother Hannah's desperate prayer and ends with him as Israel's spiritual conscience. Samuel's leadership brings victory and a return to faith, setting God's standard for holiness. The second act shifts to Saul, Israel's first king. Saul's reign starts with promise but descends into tragedy through disobedience and pride. The final act introduces David, whose faith and loyalty contrast Saul's paranoia and jealousy. We witness David's rise, from defeating Goliath to enduring years as a fugitive. This structure shows why Saul failed and why David, a man after God's heart, was chosen. The book's design reveals God's standard for true leadership. 1 Samuel begins with Hannah's silent, desperate prayer for a child. In her anguish, she vows to dedicate her son to God if he answers. God hears her, and Samuel is born, his name meaning heard by God. True to her word, Hannah gives Samuel to serve in the temple. Her prayer of thanksgiving celebrates God's power to lift the lowly and humble the proud. Samuel grows up amid corruption, but God calls him by name. Eli, the high priest, realizes God is speaking and instructs Samuel to listen. Samuel's first message is a hard prophecy of judgment, but he delivers it faithfully. From then on, Samuel becomes Israel's spiritual leader, marked by his willingness to listen and obey. God's voice returns to Israel through Samuel, setting the stage for a new era. Samuel's story is a reminder God uses listening hearts to change history. The boy who listened would become the prophet who anointed kings. Israel's elders demand a king, rejecting Samuel and ultimately God as their ruler. God tells Samuel to warn them. A king will take their sons, daughters, land, and freedom. Despite the warning, the people insist. They want to be like other nations. God leads Samuel to Saul, a man who fits their expectations, tall, impressive, from a good family. Saul is anointed and at first leads with humility and God's spirit, uniting Israel in victory. But leadership exposes Saul's flaws. Impatient before battle, Saul offers a sacrifice reserved for the prophet, disobeying God's command. Samuel rebukes him. To obey is better than sacrifice. Saul's final failure comes when he spares the Amalekite king and the best livestock, defying God's clear order. For this, God rejects Saul as king. Saul's reign, which began with promise, ends in tragedy. A man who chose fear over faith. His story is a warning. Outward strength means nothing without obedience. Saul's downfall paves the way for a new kind of king. The lesson is clear. God seeks leaders who trust and obey him. Israel's first king becomes a cautionary tale for all who follow. With Saul rejected, God sends Samuel to anoint a new king from Jesse's sons. Samuel expects the oldest, but God reminds him the Lord looks at the heart. David, the youngest and a shepherd, is chosen and anointed. God's Spirit comes powerfully on David as it leaves Saul. David's first test comes when Goliath, the Philistine giant, mocks Israel. While others cower, David is indignant for God's honor. He recalls fighting lions and bears as a shepherd. His faith is in God, not himself. Rejecting armor, David faces Goliath with a sling and 5 stones. He declares, "I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." With 1 stone, David defeats Goliath, showing the battle belongs to God. David's victory proves God uses the humble to achieve great things. The shepherd boy becomes Israel's champion. God's choice is always about the heart, not appearances. David's victory makes him a hero, but Saul's jealousy turns to obsession. The king, once chosen by God, is now consumed by fear and rage. David serves Saul faithfully, even soothing him with music, but Saul tries to kill him. Forced to flee, David becomes a fugitive, hunted in his own land. Twice, David has the chance to kill Saul, but refuses, sparing the Lord's anointed. David's restraint reveals his heart. He trusts God's timing and justice. He will not seize power by force, even when justified. David respects the office of king, despite Saul's corruption. This period of suffering shapes David's character: humility, patience, and reliance on God. Saul clings desperately to power. David waits for God's promise. Their struggle is not just political, but spiritual, a test of faith and integrity. David's journey is a crucible, preparing him for true kingship. The contrast between Saul and David reveals what God values most. David's story is more than history. It foreshadows a greater king to come. God promises David an everlasting kingdom, a covenant pointing beyond his own reign. David, though great, is flawed. His story includes sin and tragedy. The promise looks forward to a perfect descendant, Jesus, the son of David. Jesus fulfills the ideal of kingship, the good shepherd, the conqueror of sin and death. David's kingdom was earthly, Jesus's is eternal and for all people. God's choice of humble David over impressive Saul finds its ultimate expression in Jesus. Jesus comes as a servant, not a conqueror, defying worldly expectations. First, Samuel prepares us to recognize God's upside-down kingdom and the true king in Jesus. The story points us to the heart of God's plan for redemption. The stories of Samuel, Saul, and David speak powerfully to our world obsessed with appearances. We seek impressive leaders, but God looks at the heart. 1 Samuel challenges us to value integrity and faithfulness over charisma. Saul's fall warns against pride and the fear of man. How often do we compromise out of fear or desire for approval? Samuel's call, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening," invites us to quiet our lives and hear God's voice. In the noise of modern life, listening for God brings clarity and purpose. Like Samuel, we're called to hear and obey, even when it's hard. 1 Samuel points us to our need for a perfect king, Jesus the son of David. Human leaders will fail, but Jesus rules with justice and mercy. The ancient story reminds us, our hope is not in human systems, but in God's kingdom. Are we building our own kingdom or serving the true king? In the noise, are we listening for God's voice and trusting his plan?